Well, I didn't expect to be able to fill in the very end of the 15th Doctor's timeline so soon, but after that Season 2 finale, it looks like I'll be doing just that in today's episode. But don't worry, there's still plenty of other stories to fit in between TV episodes, and it looks like there will be for at least the rest of the year too. So welcome to the series where I try and place every 15th Doctor story from every form of media in a timeline of his life. And this episode will be slotting in all the Season 2 episodes as well as some novels and novellas, one of which causes a bit of headache for our timeline placements so far. So we'll see what we learn in each story and what clues there are to the placements on the timelines. Welcome to the Canon Catch-up. Now, just to say, I do try and buy all the books, audios, comics, etc. that I cover on this series so that I can actually cover them properly. But the cost of that does add up. So that being said, I'd just like to say if you would like to help support the channel and help me purchase all of these so that I can keep making this series, I do have a Patreon. There are a range of reward levels that get you access to things like behind the scenes posts and videos, shout outs on videos, and early access to videos just like this one. Link in the description down below. Now, on with the timeline shenanigans. Season 2. Season 2, for the most part, happened to the Doctor in the order they were released, apart from one notable exception. So let's cover the season as a whole. From the Doctor's perspective, the earliest events from this season are actually the flashback to the Doctor and Ruby's adventures with the Shriek observed by Conrad in the episode Lucky Day. As Conrad watches the Doctor and Ruby re-enter the TARDIS, Ruby says,
half an hour ago we were hanging out with the Beatles. I missed them.
So that pretty definitively places this scene immediately after the Season 1 episode The Devil's Cord. Then a scene at the very end of Lucky Day has the Doctor from somewhere between Seasons 1 and 2. It's definitely after Ruby has left travelling with him in Empire of Death, but clearly he's still checking up on her from a distance as he discovers what Conrad has put her through in the episode, and he pays Conrad a visit in prison, partly to threaten him to change his ways, but Conrad is not cowed, and instead mocks the Doctor and teases the name Belinda Chandra, someone Conrad as a child saw the Doctor travelling with, but who the Doctor doesn't know yet. And so the Doctor seeks her out, which we as the audience have already seen by this point at the beginning of the Season 2 opener, The Robot Revolution. So we'll put this scene immediately before The Robot Revolution. Unfortunately, before he can reach her, she is kidnapped by a bunch of robots and taken on a spaceship to Miss Belinda Chandra 1, a planet named after her when her dodgy ex-boyfriend bought one of those name a star certificate things for her when they were teenagers, and it somehow ended up in the ancient past of that solar system. And so their whole society, their whole solar system, the planet and everything is named after Belinda Chandra. In a bit of timey-wiminess, the robots, due to something Belinda tells them later, go back and kidnap Alan, the creepy ex, and install him as their leader while also cybernetically augmenting him. Due to the same time fracture that caused that kind of stuff to happen out of order, it also meant that the Doctor, while chasing the ship that had kidnapped Belinda, actually arrives 6 months before her and becomes part of the planet's resistance against the AI generator, which is Alan, and his robots. There's potentially a nice gap here for some future expanded universe stories set on Belinda Chandra world. Doctor Who, Robot Resistance, coming soon from Big Finish. Come on, Nick Briggs, hope you're taking notes. During this 6 months, he befriends a woman named Sasha 55, who he promises to take with him when he leaves, a potential future companion at that point. Unfortunately, she's killed by the robot shortly after Belinda arrives, so, Belinda becomes his companion instead. Once Alan is defeated and the Doctor tries to take Belinda home, he finds he can't, and the TARDIS just keeps bouncing off of the 24th of May 2025. So he constructs the Vindicator to help sort of triangulate their way home. A device they'll have to go to multiple places in multiple times around the universe to take readings. Robot Revolution and the next 2 episodes, Lux and The Well, basically take place immediately back to each other, with events picking up for the Doctor and Belinda straight away and them in the same costumes as they ended the previous episode. During these, the Doctor encounters another of the pantheon of gods, Lux, the god of light, and on a planet previously named Midnight, re-encounters the entity, or at least a related one, he had previously met back in his 10th incarnation. The pre-title sequence of Lucky Day sees the Doctor and Belinda land on New Year's Eve 2007, take a Vindicator reading, and encounter a small boy, who it turns out is Conrad. And this is how Conrad knows to mention Belinda to the Doctor when he is an adult. This also must mean that during this scene the Doctor twigs who he is talking to, because for him, that scene where he confronts adult Conrad has already happened. So perhaps that is why he gives him the lucky 50p, because he knows he did. While we're back on Lucky Day, a few callbacks to Doctor Who lore to note. Conrad mentions the Sycorax, the Cyberman and the Yeti as supposed hoaxes constructed by UNIT. But that means those events where humanity learned about aliens, particularly the Sycorax one, are not completely wiped from history by the crack in time or the universe reboot of the Big Bang in 2010 Series 5 that had previously been indicated.
What would I know about the Daleks?
Everything. They invaded your world, remember? Amy, tell me you remember the Daleks.
No, sorry.
So I guess we live now in a world that does know about aliens. Conrad reveals himself to be a part of a group called Think Tank. A group using the same name had existed in the 70s.
Wasn't the 80s?
That had come up against UNIT and the Fourth Doctor in the TV stories Robot. However, according to the book Invasions of Earth, A Secret History, after investigating, Colonel Ibrahim concluded that there was no link between the two similarly named groups. Which personally I think is a shame. I think there were thematic things they could have done there to link the two together, even if they never made it explicit on screen. Now, there could be space for more extended universe stories before and after the Story and the Engine episode, but the Interstellar Song Contest, Wishworld and Reality War all seem to happen effectively back to back, with the Vindicator reading taking during the events of Interstellar Song Contest being the final one, and activating of it to get them back to May 24th, seemingly setting off an explosion which flings them into being part of the Rani and Conrad's Wishworld. The Rani, of course, is a classic series villain, and I did a whole video about her history on TV and in extended media, so you can check that out for more information. But through the last 2 seasons, she's mostly been popping up under the guise of Mrs. Flood. First Ruby, then Belinda's next-door neighbours, but this season she's also popped up across time and space as a resident of 1950s Miami, as some kind of leader of the Space Marines communicating on a screen in the well, and as an audience member in the Interstellar Song Contest. And it's in that last episode that she revealed to us, the audience, her true identity, when she bi-generated after being sucked out into space with the rest of the Song Contest audience, leaving 2 incarnations of the Rani in play. Also, another thing to note in that episode is that when the Doctor was also sucked into space, he had visions of his granddaughter Susan, telling him to find her, and frustratingly at the time of recording, unresolved plotline. In Wishworld, the Doctor is living a life as John Smith, husband to Belinda, father to daughter Poppy. This is Poppy, played by the same child actor as played Captain Poppy in Space Babies, although very little reference is made to that. The Doctor is mostly fully immersed in his fake life, but he does occasionally doubt the truth of their reality. And it is that doubt that the 2 Ranis are counting on to harvest to power their Vindicator-linked device to free the ancient Time Lord Omega, the Gallifreyan who first discovered time travel, but in achieving it was trapped in the antimatter universe and basically went a bit mad, as well as resentful that the Time Lords didn't come and rescue him. Here, he's now trapped in what the Ranis call the Underverse, which may or may not be the same thing as the antimatter universe. Frankly, who knows? Either way, he's briefly freed, and has for some reason transformed into a giant, big, decaying monster. He doesn't do much though, he basically just eats the newest Rani while the other one teleports away, and then the Doctor beats him back to the Underverse using the Vindicator. When actual reality starts to reassert itself, the Doctor tries to preserve Poppy as part of it by keeping her in a zero room with Belinda while reality actually resets itself. But while it initially looks successful, it doesn't stick, and Poppy disappears with only Ruby seemingly remembering her, possibly because of her previous experience in other timelines in 73 Yards. However, the Doctor has one more idea and nudges reality by forcing a regeneration on himself and channeling the regeneration energy into the TARDIS. In this new nudge reality, Poppy, now existing again, is now Belinda and someone else's daughter. The Doctor has time to visit them before completing his regeneration out in space and turning into the face of an old companion, Rose Tyler. And so, we presume, ends the life of the 15th Doctor. Fear Death by Water. The novel Fear Death by Water by Emily Cook was released in June 2025 and sees the Doctor travelling solo. He finds himself on the paddle steamer ship the Forfarshire, man that's hard to say, which is in the choppy waters off the coast of 19th century Northumberland, just as it's being shipwrecked on a rocky island. This is actually an historical event, as are the actions of the book's main supporting character, Grace Darling, the daughter of a local lighthouse keeper who spotted the shipwreck, raised the alarm, and rowed out with her father to rescue as many of the passengers and crew as they could. These brave actions would go on to bring her nationwide fame. Where the events of the novel diverge from real history is that the Doctor is now one of those survivors. And the cause of the shipwreck is, of course, alien in origin. There is a Leviathan creature in the waters, and Grace ends up forming a psychic connection with it after making eye contact with it. There is also an alien ship from the ISC, Intergalactic Space Corps, a military unit from the planet Thalassus, who have been authorised by the Shadow Proclamation to protect the galaxy's oceans from external threats, and whose own planet was decimated by the Leviathan. While the ISC want to hunt and kill the creature, the Doctor, obviously being the Doctor, wants to save it while protecting Earthseas from it. The solution is in Grace's psychic connection, and they eventually manage to calm the creature. However, not before one of the ISC crew, Chip, is killed. In terms of placing this story on the timeline, the Doctor is travelling solo, and he makes several references to the events of the Christmas special Joy to the World, such as having to wait a year in the Sandringham Hotel, and the fact that he still hasn't sorted out that chair for the TARDIS control room.
You live in a great big giant spaceship and there aren't any chairs and you haven't even noticed because nobody ever comes round. Oh my god, I don't have any chairs.
So I think we'll put this after the Doctor Who magazine comics we put in this gap, but before that scene with Conrad where he gets Belinda Chandra's name. In terms of references and connections to the wider Whoniverse, we have the ISC being in communication with the Jadoon, the mercenary police force used by the Shadow Proclamation and first seen in Series 3 opener Smith and Jones. The Jadoon are also hunting the Leviathan, but they are currently looking for it on Marinus. Another reference because that was the planet from the first Doctor TV story, The Keys of Marinus, that had large acid oceans. The Doctor uses his intelligent gloves, first seen in the Church of Ruby Road in this story, and uses the sonic shades, used by the 12th Doctor in Series 9 and 10, in this instance to shield his eyes from an enhanced lighthouse light that they were using to lure the Leviathan in. At one point, the Doctor casually mentions that he's played the Master at the game Mastermind on Satellite 5. But when was this? He only learns of Satellite 5 as the 9th Doctor, at a time when he thinks the Master's dead in the Time War. The 10th Doctor's interactions with the Master all end with him thinking he's dead, or I guess will be dead after going back into the Time War with the Time Lords. So really, it could only have been after Day of the Doctor when the Doctor discovers Gallifrey is alive, and more likely after the 12th Doctor's first encounter with Missy, when that seems to be when he learns that the Master survived. But then if it was her, surely he would say he played Missy, not the Master. I know the pun wouldn't work, but that's how he refers to that incarnation. I don't know. If you can solve this, let me know. When did the Doctor play the Master at the game Mastermind on Satellite 5? A neat little the Doctor influencing history thing in this book is that the Doctor shows Grace how to make chips, of fish and chips fame.
Oh, can you smell chips?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want chips.
Me too.
And also it gives a Doctor Who explanation of how they became to be called chips. Not because they are the chipped bits off of potatoes, but because Grace names them after the fallen ISC member, Chip. Shirley Jackson and the Chaos Box. This is a 15th Doctor entry into Penguin Books' Icon series, where a Doctor, they've done several of them so far, meets an historical figure of some kind. In this, it's the early 20th century American writer Shirley Jackson, and this is the one that poses some issues for our timeline. We'll get to that, but first, a brief summary of what happens. Ruby asks the Doctor where he wants to go. After all, he's taken her to see The Beatles, which was her request, and now she wants him to choose. And he's a big fan of the author Shirley Jackson. But instead of taking Ruby to meet Shirley Jackson in person, he instead takes her to one of Shirley Jackson's houses long after her death, which is now acting as a museum. This, obviously being a season 1 set story with Ruby, we get a Susan Twist cameo, and Ruby vaguely recognises the receptionist at the museum, but not being able to fully place it. Just outside the museum in the town, they discover a strange man has some hold over the locals and is whipping them up into a frenzy, and he has a strange glowing box. A box that the Doctor had seen in the drawing by Shirley Jackson in the museum. Of course, time to investigate, so they hop back in the TARDIS to 1937, to Sycharis University, where Shirley was studying. Shirley impresses them by deducing very quickly that they are time travellers and takes them to a nearby wood where a woman is also rousing a gathered group to anger with a similar box to one they had seen in 2024. To cut a short story even shorter, spoilers incoming, it turns out that both these people, intent on rousing the locals to anger, are rebels from the Ursa race. The Ursa, the Doctor tells us, usually use these boxes to create a sense of calm amongst their people by fostering empathy. But the two now on Earth have corrupted the boxes because they prefer chaos. Peace takes time and discussion, scornfully says the female Ursa at one point. The Doctor sends a signal to the rest of the Ursa though, who arrive to help. They take Shirley on a trip to 2024 where they confront and defeat the male Ursa, and the rebels are taken away by their own species and Shirley returned to 1937. So, I said this caused some issues with the timeline. Obviously, Ruby is travelling with the Doctor here, so we know it's set in Season 1, and there are references to goblins, space babies and Maestro, so we know it's set after the Devil's Cord. The problem comes back to that controversial line in Devil's Cord where Ruby mentions it is June for her now.
So when is it for you back home? What time are you? June 2024?
It's hard to keep track, but yeah, I think so. June, July.
Meaning that 6 months must have passed for her since the previous episode, because Church on Ruby Road is set at Christmas and Space Babies happens immediately after that for her. However, in this story there are quite a few lines indicating she hasn't been travelling in the TARDIS very long. Maestro and Space Babies are described in the same sentence as being quite recent. The exact wording is their recently concluded adventures with the Goblin King, the Bogeyman and Maestro, which makes it sound like they all happened quite close together, and not one of them being 6 months later. The story also tells us that she's still getting used to the TARDIS, and another line says, in the brief time the pair have known each other, about Ruby and the Doctor. It very much feels like they're trying to indicate that Ruby is still within the first weeks of travelling with the Doctor at this point. But they are still all vague enough that we could stretch them to make them work. I mean, maybe 6 months is quite recent and a brief time in Ruby's mind. I would say that's certainly not the intention, but in order to make it fit, we could have that interpretation. Maybe after 6 months she is still getting used to the TARDIS, who knows. So I'm certainly not going to move the stories I've already placed in that 6 month gap to make this compressed timeline of these episodes work. But it probably does need to happen very soon after the Devil's Cord for those brief time and quite recent to still work. She does even say that they had just used music to heal the world. But due to the flashback in Lucky Day, we know that this isn't the very next adventure after that, because that was them encountering the Shriek for the first time. Other things to note from this story, Ruby mentions having a bedroom within the TARDIS, which in a contradiction feels like it fits more with being on there for 6 months rather than just like a week. I suppose you'd need somewhere to sleep even for a week, I guess. Also, the Doctor mentions other areas of the TARDIS, including a kitchen, the library, and one of the pools, which is currently apparently overgrown with algae. Shame we never got to see any of those on screen for this era, and we were just confined to the TARDIS control room. And that's it for this edition of the Canon Catch-up. At the time of recording, only 4 parts of the current 5-part Doctor Who magazine comic strip are out, so I'll cover that story next time once it's concluded. I also will probably have another novel to cover, as I'm almost finished reading it, and we'll see what else comes out in the meantime. Question for you though. What's your favourite bit of 15th Doctor Expanded Media so far? Let me know in the comments below. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to find out more about the history of the Rani included in Expanded Media, click on the video on screen now.